Rich, I'm still seeing your intro slides.
And I am trying to take it off, but it will not remove. The button's not clicking. Let me try it again here.
Okay, there we
How's
go.
that? All
Yeah.
right.
Thank
Sorry about
you.
that.
Welcome everyone to tonight's class, Pet Portrait Painting and Artist Loft Gouache, with me, your instructor, Adrian Hodge. And this is part two of this two-part class that we started last week on painting a pet portrait using gouache. So this is the last class that I am teaching for 2024. And we'll be back in January. We've got some, I don't know why I always say we. I will be back in January. And the other instructors who teach these classes for Michael's. And there may be a couple more before the end of the year that I'm not aware of. But yeah, my classes will resume the first week of January, and I've got some really fun stuff planned. 25 sketchbook prompts to start 2025 is the first class that we'll be doing in 2025, and really excited about that because last year we had a really huge turnout for 24 sketchbook prompts to start 2024. So that was exciting. And then I've got if you're enjoying gouache, we've got a abstract studies class using gouache and mixed media. Just a little bit of mixed media, but mainly the gouache for those abstract studies, and that's in January. And then also drawing teeth, which was requested by some folks that regularly come to these classes when I asked what people might want to see next. So that'll be exciting, and looking forward to those classes in January. Uh, oh, and then one more thing. This evening, I'm going to go back to doing something I used to do after the class. For those of you who are on Instagram, I'm going to do a little live Q&A for just a few minutes after the class. So if you're interested, you can join me for that. Okay, I'm going to switch to my tabletop view and we'll go over supplies and get started. So don't forget to tag your work with the hashtags Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes. And you can follow me on Instagram at ADHodge. And Rich has my link tree that he can drop in the chat, or if you're watching later on YouTube, you can just search my name and link tree, and that'll bring up all my social media and all my different things. But here's some of my business cards. I'm also on Facebook, Adrian Hodge Fine Art. I'm having a little art sale right now in my online shop, so check that out. Okay, so we've got the Artist Loft Jelly Gouache. There's the lid for the gouache I've already got opened here off to the side. And since we're already done with our drawing portion of the class, don't really need our sketchbook and pencils tonight. We did, but I'll review what we did last week before we get started tonight. I've got some Artist Loft watercolor paintbrushes here, and then tape, and that's kind of it. And then we're using the watercolor Artist Loft watercolor pad paper here, the 9x12. Okay, so, and I've got a couple of water cups and some paper towels and those sorts of things. Okay, so here's where we left off last week, and we're working towards a product that looks like this. And I'm really excited because a lot of you are painting your own pets, and I've been trying to share tips and tricks all along about what you might do for applying these techniques to other pets and other types of fur, and help some people mix up some different colors and looking for different highlights and lowlights on fur and how different fur colors can reflect different colors. So yeah, we'll be continuing with that tonight and just building on these layers. So last week we got it all sketched out in part one, and then we taped it down so that we have these margins. Whenever we peel off the tape, we'll get these clean edges all the way around, and that really just elevates a watercolor piece, anytime I have a student who doesn't tape down their edges, I'm like, oh man, it's such a missed opportunity uh, to do that because, for one, it keeps your paper from buckling quite as much, but just the way overusing the word elevate, but it really does just take it to another level when you peel off that tape and you got that clean edge all the way around. So hopefully you did that before you got started, or if you're just joining us and planning to go back and don't miss that step in part one, it really makes such a huge difference. And then we started out treating the watercolor or the gouache a lot like watercolor, keeping it really thin and doing this fat over lean rule that you've maybe heard for oil paint. It really goes for a lot of water media as well, that if you start out as thin as possible and then build up to your thicker paint, you're just going to have more control over the process as you go, and it's going to be easier to fix any mistakes that might happen. So you just kind of build your confidence up as you go so that when we get to the thicker and thicker paint, we've got these other layers shining through. We've got multiple dimensions to the fur, and things feel nice and full and not flat. So we're looking at the colors that we see underneath shining through, or maybe not shining through, but just any colors that we see on the fur that where the light catches it, there might be a different color there. And we're matching the colors as closely as we can, but not being too hard on ourselves if the colors are not perfect. So, oh, and I provided these reference photos of my cat, Linda. We had a class a couple weeks ago on pet portrait studies in graphite where we sketched some of the other images in this file, but I'm focusing on this one here, zooming in on the head and the face and a little bit of the neck fur there. And so even though we're not seeing this golden color quite as much in the fur, it's there. There's some kind of a golden color underneath. So that's what we started with, is this gold color using, kept calling it something else. The color that is listed in here is the earth's yellow and the medium yellow. So we were using those two to create a gold color and maybe a little bit of ochre. So that's where we're going to pick up where we left off, just continuing to build up these layers. Although actually where we had left off last week, we were starting to go in with a little bit thicker paint and start to layer this darker brown color a little bit, where we're seeing that darker brown color. So actually we will continue with that first, and then we'll continue to build up that gold color. So we want to go a little thicker than we went before. And if you're painting a different pet, you want to be looking for the same thing. Like, what color are you seeing underneath that top layer of fur? Are you seeing like maybe a gray shadow, or because that's what we're going to do down here in all of this white area, we're going to add a lot of gray, or maybe a little bit of that golden color again down here. So it just depends, and feel free to ask me if you need help with your color mixing or identifying or anything like that. Okay, so yeah, I started to mix up some of my colors before the class a little bit here. I've got my gray that we're gonna need, and I got this medium brown color mixed, but I didn't do the darker colors since those are a little easier. I just wanted to get a pile of some of my other colors going because I know I'm gonna need a lot of them. Okay, so I'm using these little wash cups, and you might be using a palette with some smaller wells. And then I do have a little eyedropper that I got at Michael's as well to just help me get my water in there going a little bit. And then I'm just gonna add this dark brown and a little bit of black. And I don't want it to be quite a wash. We're just picking up exactly where we left off last week. We were starting to go a little bit thicker, so not quite a puddle like we started with, but also not super thick either. I'm just really loading my brush up with that black and brown to get a nice dark brown going. We're going to end up going over this brown color with black. So that's why we don't want to go to black just yet, because again, we want these multi-dimensions to the colors. So do the same thing. If you've got a darker pet that you're painting, look for a color or two, even two colors that you're seeing in addition to that main color of the fur, so that you can give it some extra dimension and layers, because they have a lot of layers to their fur, unless they're a short hair animal. But even then, there might be some graying or different things happening. Maybe some whiter gray hairs if they're getting older. Okay, so I've got that thicker brown here. I'm just moving some room on my desk. It's always so tricky trying to navigate all the things on my desk sometimes. All right, so I'm just noticing the directional flow. Get out from under my cords here. And yeah, it maybe looks really thick when we put it on, but I know I added a bunch of water to this. And something I mentioned last week about gouache, and that I've mentioned in almost every gouache painting class that I've done for Michael's, is worth repeating. Gouache does this really interesting, tricky thing where it goes on looking, the values look different, wet versus dry. So the darker values can dry lighter, and the lighter values can dry darker. And that confuses a lot of people and kind of hurts your brain a little bit when you try to paint according to that fact, or that effect that it has. So my go-to response for people that get stuck on that is, sorry, I just lost my reference. The image floated away in the document, so I had to get it back. It's just let it dry. Just wait for it to dry before you make any decisions about what is needed next, because that can be very confusing to try to imagine, but you really want to let it dry before you move on to the next layer anyway. So that's just a good rule of thumb all the way around, is just let it dry. And then you can see how light that layer will be, or how dark that layer will be. And if you accidentally go too much with any one color, the beautiful thing about gouache is that it is so opaque that we can easily go back and amend any color choices, make things lighter or darker. But again, you just want to wait for those layers to dry. I'm just following the directional flow of the fur, following the contours of the fur as I go. That's the main technique that you want to use when painting a pet. The main concept to keep in mind. And I'm being very strategic about where I'm putting this darker brown because I want to leave some space for myself to come back in with this medium brown that I made here. I'm gonna actually go ahead and switch to that color. So I started to make it before the class started, and I started with white. And then I added, just cleaning my brush. Oh, good question, Lori. I'm just using a medium round brush right now. I've got several large and medium round brushes. This is the size of 9, so maybe that one's considered large. I'm calling it medium. And then I'm going to use that earth yellow and that medium yellow together. I'm just looking for a medium brown. Something like that. That's the color I want. And it feels a little golden. It's like a cross between that golden color that we started with and that's the brown we're looking for. Something like that. And again, I've got some water added to it, but it's not a puddle. In fact, this one is a little thicker. I'm adding a little bit of water to it. So I've got it fluid, but it's not a puddle. So it is going on a little thicker. We're increasing the thickness as we go here. And I'm just gonna go all along the edges here. I probably would have started with this color, but I wanted to finish up that dark brown that we started last week. And I'm just getting it here on the edges of that darker brown. I'm trying to make it feel like the fur is flicking my wrist out to make these little hatching marks that look like the fur. And we may end up doing this a couple more times in these layers. Just depends on how it looks when it dries and what it looks like it needs as we go. Just jumping around to everywhere I see that medium brown color or my interpretation of that color. And this is the one that I want around the eyes too. Because I want the eyes to be slightly lighter so that we can see the little slits of black of the eyes. We just made it all dark. It would be hard to see that. And it is a little lighter over here on this eye, but we can always add some lighter color on top. So when you start to use it a little thicker like this and you see it starting to dry, that's when you really can see the difference between the gouache and watercolor. It starts to take on this matte quality as it dries. I might just go ahead and do that over the entire eye slit. Why not? Easily put that back in. Okay. I think that's it for that color. Okay, and then while we're waiting for that to dry, I'm gonna switch to a smaller brush and start to build up some of these gray layers that I'm seeing around the nose and the mouth and here. And I made a decision when I was doing this example painting to not put in this huge shadow that's on the side of Linda's face. So I actually had put it in, and I've used this example so many times in my in-person gouache class in the last couple of months since I painted this example. I brought this into the class just to show people how forgiving the gouache is and how much you can rework it. And I made the decision when I was making this example, first I put in the shadow, and maybe you can see, you know, the remnants of how dark I had it over here. And then I just thought, that's a little too much for this class where everybody's following along with me. And I thought it was just taking too much time to blend it out. So I took some really thick white paint on top of that because I had already been going thicker, and I blended the white completely over it and took that shadow out, because that's how opaque it is, that you can continue to rework it a lot like oil paint. You can just add another layer as long as you know, the paint's dry enough or the right consistency to do that. And you can kind of see, if I hold it up really close to the camera, maybe you can see right here, there's like some pores where you can see the pores of like how thick the paint is right there. And I just showed that to students who were afraid to, you know, who were feeling as if the gouache was permanent in some way. And, you know, paint is not permanent. I say that so much in all of my painting classes, especially oil paint. And gouache is very similar in that we can continue to rework it and add another layer as long as it's dry, and as long as we're going thicker with it. We're not going to have cracking or anything, but I can kind of see the pores right there of that thicker paint underneath. But anyway, worth sharing that. And also to say that we're not going to put that big shadow in. We're going to keep it kind of light. We are going to put the shadow in slightly on the side of the nose, and over here on this side a little bit. And you feel free to put it in more if you want, but I'm going to mostly leave it out. But I'm going to take this gray. So I just started with white, a whole bunch of white, and added black to it. And then I dropped some water in there, and I made a pretty big pile of it because I'm gonna blend this out. I'm gonna add some white to this and use this quite a bit for the fur as we go. And I just wanted to start out with a good amount here. But I'm gonna add a little bit of water to it for now so that we're not going too thick, so that I'm not going too thick, so that I can increase the thickness as I go. We haven't done many layers on this part of the fur yet. Okay, so look at my photograph and not I'm looking at the painting. I want to paint my painting from the other painting, be a copy of a copy. So yeah, really just want to get some dimension going. And also this, I said this last time, and it's worth repeating. We're trying to build up some color so that the white shows up on top of something. Because if we just did all this white for the fur on top of the white paper, it wouldn't look like much of anything. And plus, we do see a lot of gray in between all of the white hairs. So we need to start to build those up. And we're also going to add in a little bit of a purple colored here around the mouth as well and the nose. But first, we're just building up some gray, following the contours of the fur. I'm going to turn my light down a little bit. Got a glare. That's better. Okay, so yeah, just following the contours of the fur and starting to build up those gray shadows. Because we want those whiskers to show up as well. We just need like a substrate, if that makes sense. And we also want to work on a different part of the painting right now than that area that's still super wet, so we can give that a chance to dry. And we're going to just kind of go back and forth like this until the end of the class, going from our wet areas to our areas that have dried so that we can let those layers dry as we go. And I recommend that you do the same if you're working on a different kind of pet. You know, identify some areas that you can work on all at once, like the coloring of the fur and the highlights or the lowlights. And then while you're waiting for the wet areas to dry, you work in a different zone and then go back and forth between those different zones. So this is the part of the painting that I like to call the teenager phase, that every painting goes through an awkward moment like this where, you know, it looks really weird. Linda doesn't look right at the moment, but we need to build up this color like this so the white can cover it up and this can show through. So it's just a little awkward, and you have to trust the process that when we get these next layers on, it's not gonna look as weird and funny. Senior year will always come for all of us, for all of our paintings. And a lot of people give up when they get to the teenager phase of a painting where it gets super awkward and they think it's never going to improve or get any better, or worse, that they ruined it, that they messed it up. And that could not be farther from the truth, because we need this. This is part of the process. We just have to push through it. Okay, there is a little more gray up here on this ear, although I zoomed in a little more on this version. My other one's a little more zoomed out, so I can't see quite as much of that ear. But I'm gonna get some gray up there. Let's see. Like, I made all this gray. And then
Adrian, can you adjust your lighting again to show the gray there on the left? It just got really bright.
okay, yeah, let me turn. I don't know what's going on. That wasn't doing that last week with this lighting, but I tried turning that off. Well, now we've got a shadow,
Yeah, that's better. Oh,
but let me turn this one back up and see what that does. Nope, that's too bright again.
That's pretty good.
Oh, that's good. Okay. I think it's just too light. It's too bright with all the white and the gray, I guess. All right. Since I made so much of this gray, I'm going to use some of this to make this violet grayish color. Just going to take my gray here, some of it to another place on another part of my palette and add some purple to it. Slowly introduce the purple. Maybe a little faster because that looks like it needs a little more. Add a little black to it, make it a little darker. Let's see. Making a gray and adding some purple to it. And I'm willing to bet on a different pet. We're also seeing this color around the mouth. And again, we're going to be adding some white on top of this, so it's going to look a little bizarre. And we're just going to embrace it. And I've still got my small round brush. And we're going to add that purple color on top to the chin as well. And this is going to look way less weird when I get all the white back on top of it and blend it out. It doesn't look that weird now, but if it's looking weird on yours, just trust it. Now it's gonna look like a little beard and a mustache here, because it's under the nose as well, between the nose and the mouth. And also at the edge of the nose, the nostril area, that's the same color we're going to use there for that shadow instead of black, because black would stand out really strong. And this is the kind of thing you might end up, be patient with yourself. You might end up reworking this a few times. I might end up reworking mine a few times. And we're going to add a little dark brown on top of that with a skinnier brush. But for now, we're just going to do that just to get that base layer of the colors that we're seeing in that area. Oops. And then maybe even a little bit above the nose too. We need those dimensions, y'all. That's how we make it look so three-dimensional. There's multiple dimensions of color. Okay. I think that's pretty good for that color. And let's see how we're doing up here. This is still a little wet, but it's getting there. It's almost dry. So almost ready to go thicker up here. We could go ahead and start to, since this was so thin, it's already dry, a lot of my gray. So I think I'm going to go ahead and start adding some of this white fur in. Oh yeah, this is definitely the teenager phase. I just glanced up at how it's looking on the Zoom. It looks awkward right now. Okay, so I'm just spritzing my white, and this is a size 7 round brush. All of my brushes are round brushes tonight in this Artist Loft watercolor set. Other white is a little stickier, so I'm gonna go with that one. All right, we got a nice big pile of white. Just gonna drip some water into that. But it's not, again, so it's not super thick, but it's definitely not a wash. It's fluid, but getting thicker. And I'm just gonna start to add the white. And the fur feels a little shorter to me here. So I'm not flicking my wrist out quite as much. I'm trying to get something that feels a little shorter. And this is where I said we might have to add that gray a couple of times, but also I'm not putting that shadow in, so. And it is covering up the gray quite a bit, but it's also the white is showing up more than it would if the gray wasn't there. So it's still showing through. But again, we can't judge it until it's dry. We're just adding this layer and trusting the process. I'll admit I am finessing mine a little bit, and that's the sort of thing that I always think it just can't be taught, y'all. You just got to practice. So if you see me doing a certain move with my paintbrush and you're like, wait, what'd you just do there? It's called finessing. Just finessing it, kind of working it in a little bit and following those contours. Maybe I'm trying to cut a little bit of corners for myself with my example here so that I can get ahead of y'all. But you might have to do it a few times, a few layers to get it to look the way that you want it, and that is okay. And then just adding the nose hairs, but noticing how they drift and travel in an upward direction. They do kind of create some interesting grooves there on the nose, but mostly I'm just trying to get the main directional path. And we can even go ahead and start to flick some of our flick our wrist and flick these little hairs into the coloring of the mask. What I was calling it, feels like a Batman mask. We're starting to create that effect, but we might have to do that a few more times, or at least one more time. Just trying to follow the directional path of the fur. If you're painting your own pet, you're just noticing where the fur is visible. And if it feels like overwhelming because there's so much fur and there's so many little detailed hairs, approach it like this. So this is something that I came up with a while ago and I've been sharing a lot lately, and people find this really helpful. Whenever you've got a repetitive subject matter like this fur, a lot of people get really overwhelmed because they just feel like it's so tedious and maybe they're not creating the effect that they want and it feels like it's never going to end or something. Okay, so think about the north, like a map, like north, south, east, and west, and identify a spot, like a little detail moment in the fur in the north, and try to get that in there. So, like this moment at the top of the hairs where it does that little forking thing. And maybe drifted that up a little too high, but that's okay. Still looks like Linda so far to me. And then here around the eyes. So, just find a couple of moments here and there where you really hone in on that particular patch of fur, but don't overwhelm yourself and make yourself feel like you have to make it that detailed everywhere. And I find that is helpful because the human eye can only focus on one thing at a time. So when we're drawing and painting, we're creating an optical illusion on the page for a viewer to look at, right? We're trying to make them think that they're looking at a cat or a dog or whatever pet you're painting. And you don't have to make something hyper realistic all over for it to still feel realistic because the eye is only looking in one spot at a time. So you kind of trick the viewer into thinking it's more detailed than it is by adding those details in several spots all around the composition. Okay, so I'm starting to get out here to these outer fur moments, and this is where I'm going to really flick my wrist out and start to create this big moment. And I made this pretty thin, but when I do this again with a thicker layer of gouache, this is going to cover up the pink. It's going to be more opaque. I didn't want it to cover everything up right now. I want that gray to show through a little bit. Oh, I just pulled some of that pink out of the background onto the fur a little bit there. Don't want to do that. That will not happen when I go in with the thicker white, but it's happening with the thinner white right now. So I'm just going to leave that area alone. Come over here. And get these longer hairs. Trying to get this little wave to happen. And I'm gonna go up here. Probably could have added a little more gray right here. I'm gonna add a little more gray to this area. And then while we have the gray still, add a little brown to that. And start getting back up into the darker areas. Because I never did put this lighter area right here. Right. This would be a great moment to like just take a break. Just let this all get totally dry. People always ask about a hair dryer at this moment in a painting like this. You could use a hair dryer. I did not bring my hair dryer with me to my studio tonight because I just think that letting it dry naturally is preferable. And maybe that's just a preference because I tend to work with a lot of water media but in this case it really would have been fine because this is so thick. But the areas that are super wet right now are the areas that will be dry by the time we get back to them. So I'm gonna focus on this area right here again, which is all very dry. I can touch it, it's not cold, it's not bubbled, it's not buckling. If yours is wet, shiny, buckling, bubbled, you would do much better to wait for that to be completely dry. And if you have a hair dryer handy, that would be a good idea, but I don't really need it since the area I'm about to go back into is pretty dry. But this whole area is definitely very wet. It's shiny in some spots, it's bubbling, I can touch it and it in some places, but it's cold. So that tells me it's still too wet and I want to leave it alone for now. Okay, so I got my larger round brush back out, my number 9. And now I'm ready to go a lot thicker with my paint. So I'm gonna get this brown going again, and this time I'm gonna make it use more of this. These colors are a little confusing in this thing. I think this is actually the deep red. I did the same thing last week. I was calling it something else. So we've got the Ponzo red right there, and that's the rose red. And then this is a deep red. So it's like a canyon red. If I were making this color, I would mix red and green together and to make a brown, but I would have more red than green. And I should get this deep red color. Okay, so I want that. And then my burnt umber brown mixed together. And this is the color we're gonna do around the eyes. And for that layer of fur that we were doing more golden, we're gonna go in with this reddish brown color. And I'm going a lot thicker this time. But this might be the final layer. Or you might need another couple of layers. Just depends on what happens as you get it on here and if you need to go back in and rework something. Following the contours. I turned the light off and it's still nice and bright on the zoom, but I'm having a hard time seeing my her fur. It's so dark around the eyes in the picture. And since my light is turned down, I'm just having a hard time seeing that dimension there, but I know it's there. I can see it in my other painting. Maybe this is a moment where I should paint from my other painting for now. So this looks real stark as I'm putting it on wet, but it's going to dry matte. It's going to dry a little lighter. It's a darker value. And we can always add a little bit more of that lighter brown or whatever we feel like we need to balance it out if it feels like too much. And this is definitely not the exact color that I'm seeing on Linda's fur, but I feel like it works to create the effect of layers of brown here.
Patricia's asking a question. She's wondering if some shades are too dark, will you add more water?
No, that's a really good question. So at this point, now that I'm going thicker with the gouache, if I were to add water on top, I mean, while it's wet, if you do, it's a little risky because it can crack when it dries. If you were to put like, or you can get like a weird little, like I accidentally did it up here. You can see what happened when I accidentally added some water to my thick gouache on the background. And then I just left it alone to dry and decided I would wait for it to dry and then I'll just have to do another coat right there to cover that up. I pulled it out with my paper towel, but if I had left the puddle of water there, then it might have cracked. There was a class last year in January. It was Learn a New Skill, Gouache 101, I believe was the title of the class. And Rich has that document with all of the classes that I've done for Michael's to date, or at least up until about a month ago when sorry, it's not a document, it's a playlist. It's a playlist on YouTube that will take you to all the classes. Yeah, so you should be able to find it there, and we go through all these different brush strokes with the gouache in that class. And in one of those examples, I show what happens when you go I think I do at least, or I'm assuming I talk about it because I have an example of when I accidentally got a drop of water on top of thick paint and left it there and it cracked. So you just, once you go thicker, you want to stay thicker. Just keep increasing the thickness, but you can wait for it to dry, see how it looks different, dry versus wet. And remember, it dries really matte too. So right now that looks really funny because we've got this combination of glossy and matte happening here because where it's wet, it's shiny, but when it dries, it all becomes matte. And we're also going to go back over this with some black, and that's going to, just color theory. Sometimes things look different next to different colors. Right now, this looks maybe a little jarring, and maybe it does in yours as well. But whenever we get the darker color next to it, it's going to tone that down a little bit. So it's kind of clashing right now, but we also haven't blended it yet. So again, we got to just trust this process. This is why I did a two-part version for this class because there's so many layers and we have to patiently build them up here. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And yeah, I'll admit I thought that color was a little not correct, but I'm trusting myself right now. I'm like, I think that's gonna look okay when it dries. And if it doesn't, then I'll add a different color on top that will blend it out and make it look more natural. Okay, so even though that whole area is all wet, it's still dry right here where I'm gonna add this dark brown in, and it's starting to dry in these spots and it's becoming, it looks more matte right there. So that's what it looks like dry. And that is not as jarring as it looks where the light's hitting it and it's shiny. And that's going to tone down as soon as I get this black on here. So let me get that going. Okay. All right. So I want my black to be thicker. I'm just getting a nice little pile of it with that same size 9 brush. And I am going to add a little bit of that burnt umber to it, tone it down a little bit. You can also make your own black using all of your primary colors, and it won't look completely black, but it will be, it'll have some dimension to it. You could also use your burnt umber and your darkest blue to make a black. I am just using the black out of the set here tonight, but I do often prefer to make my own black. So burnt umber and blue would be probably my go-to out of this set to make the black. And it would just have, especially for fur, because black is not a color that occurs in nature very often, but on our pets, yeah, when they're, well, we talked about this last week with black pets. They do reflect certain colors in the light, like maybe violet or gray or blue. But in this photograph, it does look pretty dang sleek black where the deepest black is on the fur. So I'm just using that black, but I added some brown to it just to give it a little bit of extra dimension. And if I wanted to push that even more, I could add a little bit of this blue to it. But it's just going to eat it up. It's not going to be really obvious, but it's in there. Okay. So just like with that last layer, this is going to look real shiny and thick as we're putting it on. And if it's overpowering, just know that we can tone it down by adding another color. We're going to add some of these lighter little ear whiskers going up on top of this. I'm trying to create this nice round moment right here. Kind of squished my paintbrush down to let that little round moment happen. And just flicking my wrist in the opposite direction now to try to get it to not cover up those whiskers. That we worked so hard to put in there. I'm sure you did too. Keep saying we. I'm being so aware of myself saying we. Because y'all are doing this with me. We're painting, but you might be painting your own pets. I'm so excited about those of you who are doing your own pets too. I can't wait to see them. Okay, yeah, see that black looks really strong. And I just covered up so much of those other dimensional colors that I worked so hard to put in there, but I can put a few back in. Also, at a certain point, you have to look at your painting and make sure you're doing what is right for your painting and not holding yourself too militantly to your photograph. Because when we're making art, we already have the photograph, right? We're looking for an artist interpretation of the thing that we're painting. I'll go ahead and put the eye slit in there. I'm gonna make sure I get it in the right spot. I think right there. Drifts up. Yeah, right now the black feels very pasted on in all these areas. But whenever I blend back into it with those other colors, it should feel more balanced. Oh, I feel like I put the eye slit in the wrong spot. Doesn't look right to me. Hmm. Let me get the other one in there and then I'll see what needs to happen. I knew when I covered those up, I was taking a risk, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. I was cutting corners. Just trying to make sure I didn't have to do another layer in there. I didn't know, y'all. I think I might have put my eyes in the wrong spot. Let's see. Let me get the other colors in there first before I think it still looks like Linda. I'm gonna blend out a little more. It should balance out. Just turning it to look at it myself. See, this is probably wouldn't bother anybody else because she's not your cat, but I feel like I just took away some of her likeness by putting the eyes in the wrong spot proportionally to her nose. Maybe I just need to make them a little more rounded. Hold them down. There we go. That looks a little bit more like her. One time I was painting someone and I felt like I wasn't capturing their likeness in their eyes. And then I added the little in the little corner of their mouth, a little smile that they had in the corner of their mouth, and then it looked like them. So the eyes were fine. It was just that there was something else on the face that wasn't matching up. And so it didn't quite feel like them yet. So that's why I was like, I don't want to judge it yet. It might just be that all these other things are weird at the moment. All right, how we doing on time? Oh my goodness, last time I looked at the time, it was 6:45 and I was like, oh, we got plenty of time. And now all of a sudden it's almost 10 after 7. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna start making our way towards the finish line here. So with really involved painting demos like this, even in a 2-part class, I hit this moment sometimes where it's like, okay, I'm maybe not going to get all the details that I have in my other example in here, but if I have to go back to my other example and go back and forth between that one and this one a little bit and show you how I got there, that's what I will have to do. But this is almost pretty much done, and I think after all these layers, y'all are definitely equipped with the knowledge to finish out what needs to be done here, which is just continue doing what we've already done. So we've already created these other colors that need to come back in a little bit now. So once this black is dry, we need to go back in with those other colors, that medium brown and the lighter brown, and maybe a little bit of gray, and then definitely the white. And we need to just put those other colors, like do a few little flicks of the wrist to get them back in there so that the black doesn't feel so stark against it. And then once we have that blended out in a way that feels natural, then we put those white whiskers in, which I think I should be able to do in just a little while, but I don't think I'm gonna have time to blend out all those things because I want to address this area around the mouth. And I want to get another thick layer of white on here. Okay, so get that going. When I'm creating these class examples, I try to be mindful of the time and I tell myself I'm not going to spend more than 3 hours on them so that I can make sure to complete them in a total of 3 hours with the classes, but it's so hard not to keep messing with stuff and adding little details and fine tuning, and that takes time. Yes, Jennifer, I'm with you. Art cannot be rushed. Okay, so we've got our thick white now. And now it's really starting to come together once we get these last white layers on here and going super thick with it. Now it just, this is where we really let the gouache do its magic. And so I'm using this big brush, but I'm using the tip of it here to get these really thick little white hairs. And you could use your smaller brush to do it too. But I like being able to go back and forth with the same brush between my different brush strokes here, so I can get like some fatter ones in there. And then I can do the little ones too. And maybe that was a little too much white, so might have to put some purple back in there if I had more time. I'm not going to worry about it too much right now. I'm just being mindful not to cover up all the gray, because I do want some little patches of gray to show through right there. And I can get these big swathy areas to happen now. Now is where I can go real thick out on top of that pink background. Just really load up my brush. I'm just really jumping around to all these different, the north, south, east, and west. And getting some thick white on there so I can quickly create the illusion of a finished pet portrait. And yeah, that's looking pretty good. It really doesn't take long once you get to this point. And now we just need all these little details, which I want to make sure I touch on. Okay, so might need a few more finesse moments here, but I think that's good enough to start to see the light at the end of the tunnel in that area. And I'm going to do this little bit of a shadow inside the nose. So I'm using my fine liner brush here, and I could use black, but the black might be a little too much. I used a little bit of rose red here too underneath, I can tell. So let me make a little red and black together. That, maybe have your paper towel handy, because if you know, mess up with a fine line moment like this, you can just wipe it out with your paper towel and give it a second to dry and then try again. Maybe a little more red there would have been better, but that's fine. Make it a little thinner on this side. Okay. And then I want these little dots where the whiskers are poking out, but I don't want those to stand out too much. So I'm going to take my gray that I already have and just add a little bit of my dark brown black mixture to it so I get more of a dark gray. And again, have my paper towel handy here, so if this goes wrong, I can just grab it out and try again. They might look like they're standing out too much, but give them a second to dry because again, when they're shiny and wet, they're gonna stand out more. You could do the same thing like up here with this dark gray or black. Maybe black would be better, that black brown mixture to like start to get some of the little whiskery moments to come back down into the fur there. And this would be thicker. I'm using a thin, watered down version right here on top of thick paint, and that's not a good idea. A bit of black there. Just a little. And all of this is gonna look like too much when it's wet. So don't judge it when it's wet. Let it dry and then decide if you need to redo it. So many mistakes happen when people freak out before they let it dry. You know, they judge it while it's wet and think it's ruined and they need to fix something. And it's like, no, it's just give it a second and it'll look different. Okay, so yeah, we need some fine tuning moments here that I'm not gonna have time for, but I think y'all get the idea of what we need here. So really just blending out some of those areas, like might even help to go back in and put a little bit more pink right there. I had that red under the nose and that really helped. And I probably redid this area like 5 or 6 times if I'm being honest. Because it's hard to nail it on the first try. So to get it to really all blend and be the way we want it, I would like another 20 minutes to just rework that a few more times. So I'm just going to take my whites now, my thick whites, and that thinnest brush. Put some of these final whiskers on here. Okay, so we've got that white brush loaded up. And again, you might have to do this a few times. If it doesn't work out the first time, then you just wait for it to dry, or maybe wipe it out with a paper towel. You are gonna have to rework if you have to rework the whiskers a few times, but you know, they're not gonna show up unless you've got enough gray underneath there. So they might not that much for me right now, but I'm gonna try it anyway. Just a big, long flick of the wrist. Use your whole arm movement. Pretty good. Something like that. And then we want these up here as well. So locking my wrist. Sometimes I put my pinky out to steady myself a little bit and think about your whole arm is moving. Keep that straight. These are definitely going to show up. And then this is where we're going to do the same thing right here. See, this is what you want. You want it all nice and dry and matte like this. Then you can really just get in here. This is like the sweet spot. This is the most fun to paint with the gouache, I think, is when it gets so thick like this and you can get this really graphic quality. That's why I wanted to make sure I spent the last several minutes doing this so that I could motivate y'all if you're not here at this point yet to stick it out and get it all nice and blended. so that you can go back in with this opaque white, the thickest white on top. It's like a dream. It's just so satisfying the way you can get those details in there and that graphic quality with it. It's one of my favorite mediums to paint with because it is just so satisfying when you get to this point, but sometimes it takes a while to get there. And you can go thick from the start with it. You just won't have as much control. I think building up your confidence with it like this, by the time you get to the thickest layers, it's not as scary. And you've got all this scaffolding underneath that you built up. And we get some more thick white and do that. These other whiskers on the other side here. So I just got my thickest white, not really any water added to it. I mean, just enough so that my paintbrush is gliding through it. And I'm really loading up that brush to size 1 so that I can just draw with my paintbrush. And I think I mentioned this last time. I know I mentioned it in the Gouache 101 class and other gouache classes that we've done, that using these shading techniques that you use with a pen, so hatching, cross hatching, stippling, scribbling, like you're drawing with your paintbrush. Those were a little trickier because my cord, I'm blaming my cord, was in my way. I couldn't quite get the wrist movement going that I wanted there. But yeah, it's like these little hatching marks. It's like I'm drawing with my paintbrush. That's the most effective way to use the gouache. All right. So yeah, I'm like addicted now to putting these little whiskers on because it's just so satisfying to put those little details on there. And that really pulled it together. I felt like it needed to be blended out more, but now that I'm putting those on, I'm like, yeah, it's pretty good. And her eyes don't look as weird anymore. See, I was judging it before it was dry too. Before all the facts were in. Oh, I forgot the whiskers on that side. We got a couple more minutes here. And then I want to see nails and doings. So yeah, you can't really see those pores on this side. Oh, and then we got to peel off the tape. That is so satisfying too. Okay, let me go ahead and do that because my background is dry. If your background is still wet, if any part of your painting that is touching the tape is still wet, then you want to wait for that to dry because nothing is sadder than when you've got this beautiful painting and then you accidentally rip the paper because you're impatient and want to peel the tape off when something's still wet. But everything that's touching my tape is dry, so. Okay. It's so fun. I wish I added a little bit more white whiskers down there by the mouth. I'm gonna do that real quick. I feel like that's all this one needs now. Oh, it looks like Linda. I did it. I captured her again. Get a little more. Linda Herbert Bagel. That's her full name. We just added the Herbert recently and it really, really rounds her out. Her unofficial name lately is just Baby. She's the babyest baby, or the oldest baby, because she's about to turn 13 in January. 13. The oldest baby. I love all the chat comments. I haven't gotten to read all of them, but I just saw that one pop up from Jennifer. I'm gonna scroll down and read it. With the gray, when you look at her further away, you can see the shape of her face against her neck fur. Oh, yeah. All right. Oh, I love absolutely perfect. Okay. Let me switch to, I would love to see some of y'all's examples. If you want to hold them up. Turn the light back on. And Rich can spotlight you. Oh my goodness, look at that. Oh, Sandra, that is so lovely. And what a cutie. That is such a great photo. Oh my goodness, Barbara, that looks amazing. Oh, you got her little squishy face on all that coloring. It looks so nice. Oh my gosh, the neck fur is so dynamic. Oh, that's lovely, Patty. Yes, but all that detail and the graphite of your dog, that's beautiful blending and value there. Oh, the soft fur on the neck is just so nice. And this is Autumn. You got your reference photo there. Oh, I remember when you were drawing that in graphite. Wow, you really captured some realism there around the face and the fur. That's so lovely. And the nose, you got a couple different colors on the nose, and that makes it feel really nice and full. This is Levi. Oh, you just captured, she's so regal there. Oh, that's beautiful. I love the green background too. Wow, that's so nice. I just love how full the fur is. Oh, I remember this one from last week, Patty, that turned out so good. Yeah, the fur is just really dynamic as well. This is John. Ooh, I love how thick you went with the white gouache, John. You really got some fullness and some volume happening there around the muzzle. Yeah, and the chin. Those details are really nice as well. Beautiful work. It's Karen. Oh, I just love all of these. Oh my gosh, so cute. Oh, their personalities are coming across so much there. A cute little mouse. I love it. Oh, Patricia. Yes. Oh, you captured her like scowly face. I know you're going to keep blending that though, and I bet that'll just come together so much more. That's lovely. Yeah, the all the different layers. Those colors are looking so nice. Thank you all so much. What a great group. Oh, this is so fun. I just enjoy seeing y'all's paintings at the end of these classes so much. It just makes it all worth it and so fun to see. Um, thank y'all so much for joining me for this class, and feel free to tag me and tag your work with those hashtags. Make it with Michael's classes, if you post them anywhere on social media. And I'm going to hop over to Instagram for about 10 minutes here. If you want to join me, and we can talk more about pet portraits, and if you have any more questions about this process, I'd love to answer them. And we'll just hang out for a minute and then go home. All right. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Rich. Y'all have a great evening. Good night.